Having failed to press his advantage at the Battle of Paraitakene, due to limited supplies in both food and, more importantly, the goodwill of his men, Eumenes buried his dead and moved on to Gabiene for the winter of 317-316. Gabiene is in the region of Isfahan, in central modern Iran, an area known at the time for its abundance of food. Once there, Eumenes billeted his army in various towns and cities in the area, some up to 6 days' march away, demonstrating his confidence as he settled in for the winter. Across from Eumenes, Antigonus had settled with his men in the city of Gadamala, an uncertain location out across the Dasht-e Kavir, or the Great Salt Desert, between 200 and 300 kilometres, or 120 and 180 miles away. Separated by the desert and winter weather, the armies and their leaders awaited renewed conflict. G'day and welcome back to the Research Project History, and in this episode we're continuing with the Second War of the Diadochi, with the final showdown between two of the most influential successors to Alexander at the Battle of Gabiene. But before we jump into it, I'd really appreciate it if you could help me out and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. Approaching the winter solstice in December of 317, Antigonus knew that following his losses in the Battle of Paraitakene, he was now at an even weaker position compared to Eumenes. Eumenes' phalanx was largely intact, and the veteran silver shields were a class above any other phalanx contingent. Added to this, his elephants greatly outnumbered those of Antigonus. This being the case, a straightforward battle on the wide-open salt plains of Media would greatly favour Eumenes. To counter this weakness, he decided on subterfuge and planned a surprise attack on Eumenes, who was in Gabiene. Antigonus's plan was to take the route through the desert straight to Eumenes and attack him before he had time to prepare. As harsh as the desert would be, it would mean they would avoid contact with the local populations that may notify Eumenes or his allies of their movement, and would also cut down their expected travel time from 25 days to just 9. With this plan proposed, Antigonus ordered his men to gather 10 days' worth of pre-prepared food and ready themselves to march. During the crossing of the desert, Antigonus allowed his men to have fires in the day, but forbade them to remain burning during the night, as the desert plain was surrounded by hills and higher ground, meaning any fires during the night would be visible from a great distance and could alert Eumenes, his scouts or allies to their movement. For 5 nights the men stuck to their discipline, enduring freezing overnight temperatures, which for December has an average overnight low of -2 degrees Celsius or 29 Fahrenheit. However, after 5 nights of suffering, the cold became too much for some of the men to bear, and they broke with their leader's command and kept fires lit during the night. Just as Antigonus had feared, these alerted inhabitants of the region that Antigonus and his army were making their way to Eumenes. These locals sent swift camel-mounted messengers to Eumenes, giving him time to hurriedly prepare for renewed fighting. Aware that it would take longer than 3 or 4 days to gather his forces, Eumenes took a page out of Antigonus's playbook at Paraitakene to try to convince Antigonus that his army was prepared to meet him. Taking those he had at his immediate disposal, he set them in position on the hilltops, spread out over an area that would usually be taken up by an entire army. These men were instructed to keep fires going, mimicking the activity of a full camp, with many bright fires early in the evening, but then fewer, smaller ones as the night wore on. His deception worked, and allies of Python, convinced by it, sent word to Python and Antigonus, alerting them that Eumenes' forces were gathered and ready on the advantageous high ground at the edge of the desert. For Antigonus, this was exactly what he had been desperate to avoid, and now he was significantly on the back foot for the upcoming battle. With the chance of mounting a surprise attack on a scattered opponent now out the window, Antigonus changed tact and detoured from the most direct route into the inhabited areas of Media, to instead resupply, rest and reinforce his troops, so they could arrive at the battle in as improved a condition as possible in the circumstances. With his subterfuge working, Eumenes was afforded the time to call his forces from their scattered locations and gather them at his encampment on the edge of the desert, which he fortified with a palisade and ditch, further improving his defensive advantage. All was not quite as good as it seemed though for Eumenes. The scattered winter quarters had not been kind to his already shaky grasp on the command. As Antigonus and Tithonus, leaders of the Silver Shields, plotted with others of the Macedonian satraps and generals to do away with the Greek Eumenes once the threat of Antigonus and Python had been done away with. As Antigonus neared the edge of the desert, he learned from local allies that Eumenes' elephants had been slow in departing their winter quarters, and although nearby, had not yet joined Eumenes. Desiring to eliminate this difficulty, Antigonus sent a force of 2,000 mounted Median lancers and 200 Tarentines, along with all of his light infantry to deal with the elephants. Eumenes caught wind of what was happening, and responded by assembling 1,500 of his strongest cavalry and 3,000 light infantry to assist his elephant squadrons. Antigonus's forces intercepted the elephants first, and quickly overwhelmed the 400 cavalry who were escorting the elephant squadrons. And despite inflicting damage to the elephants, reinforcements from Eumenes arrived before they could be eliminated. Unwilling to fight a cavalry battle at this stage, the two forces disengaged, thereby granting Eumenes his elephants. After an interval of a few days, with no more trickery or subterfuge available, the two generals lined up in the desert plain, 7 kilometres or 4.5 miles from each other. Antigonus placed his cavalry on either wing, which had been supplemented with extra men from Media, recruited during the detour, taking his cavalry to 9,000, 4,500 on each wing. The stronger cavalry units he, as at Paraitakene, positioned on the right, under the command of his son Demetrius, with the left under Python. In between the cavalry wings, he lined up his phalanx. These had also been supplemented with fresh recruits during the detour into Media. His 65 elephants and light infantry were spaced out across the front. Between his light infantry and phalanx, Antigonus was in command of around 22,000 foot soldiers. Learning that Antigonus was on the opposing right wing, Eumenes positioned himself along with his strongest cavalry and infantry on his left, directly opposite Antigonus. With him, he included most of the leading satraps and generals, not only for their fighting prowess, but also to keep them in sight, away from their own men, making it harder for them to attempt some underhanded move, ever aware of his decreasing popularity and utility with his allies. In the centre, he placed his phalanx, with the Silver Shields again taking the centre position. On his right, he placed the remainder of his cavalry under a relatively unknown commander Philip, further evidence of the distrust he had in his more well-known and capable leaders. He instructed Philip to avoid direct conflict and watch the result of the battle from the other wing, mirroring Antigonus's strategy from the previous battle. Off to the left, he placed a screen of his 60 strongest elephants, accompanied by light troops, to try to prevent Antigonus from outflanking him from that side. In front of the cavalry wings and phalanx, he placed the remaining 50 or so elephants interspersed with light infantry. His army totalled 36,700 foot soldiers, 6,000 cavalry, and 114 elephants, outnumbering Antigonus in every department apart from cavalry. Before the forces could meet, Antigonus, general of the Silver Shields, sent a Macedonian horseman to within shouting distance of Antigonus's phalanx to unsettle the unit that had fared the worst in their previous encounter. This man proclaimed, "Wicked men, why are you sinning against your fathers who conquered the world under Philip and Alexander?" He went on to add that the veteran Silver Shields would soon once again prove their worth to the kings and the glory of their past battles. This plan was a success, as when Antigonus's soldiers heard it, they protested that they were fighting against their kin and elders, although the memory of the previous battle was probably the more significant driver of their emotion. Seeing the disturbance that had been created, the ranks of Eumenes cheered and demanded that he lead them against the enemy immediately. Eumenes, seeing their enthusiasm, indicated to his trumpeters to sound the signal to begin, causing the whole army to raise the battle cry. The first to meet were the elephants, followed by the cavalry led by Demetrius and Eumenes, followed by the rest of the forces. A feature of this battlefield was the fine salt-permeated dust it was made from, which, with close to 75,000 men and beasts engaged in the battle, caused great plumes of dust to fill the air, making it difficult for anyone to grasp what was happening across the battlefield. Taking advantage of this, Antigonus sent his detachment of light-mounted Median and Tarentine cavalry on a wide flanking manoeuvre out to the right and around behind Eumenes' lines to capture his baggage train, about 1 kilometre behind the main force. Successfully navigating to the baggage unnoticed, they found it only lightly guarded, though with many people, including the wives and children of the men fighting at the front. Dispatching the few defenders, they succeeded in capturing both the baggage and the people, and began ferrying them away to Antigonus's base. While this was going on, Antigonus used his advantage in cavalry numbers and assembled another large detachment of cavalry, and focused an attack on the cavalry opposite. Peucestes, satrap of Persia, seeing he was outnumbered and with no true loyalty to Eumenes, decided that self-preservation was the order of the day and fled the scene. This inspired a further 1,500 others to follow suit and hightail it from the battlefield, leaving Eumenes with less than half of his left cavalry wing, leaving him with something like a 5-to-1 cavalry disadvantage on that end of the battle lines. With what few troops he had, Eumenes fought on, attempting to fight his way to Antigonus himself and take out his rival in single combat, just as he had done with Craterus at the Battle of the Hellespont in the First War of the Diadochi in 321. Despite fierce fighting and losses on both sides, the weight of numbers was beginning to take their inevitable toll on Eumenes, when, to make matters worse for him, the lead elephant from his left flank shield fell, having been overcome by those opposite, leaving him exposed on the flank. Seeing no way to victory on his left wing, Eumenes led what remained of his cavalry through the dusty haze round behind the phalanx to join the right wing to see if there was anything that could be accomplished on that end. While Antigonus was having great success in the cavalry battle, the battle between the two phalanx forces was a completely different story, with the silver shields once again showing their value and experience. Diodorus records the somewhat unlikely statistics that they not only took on the entirety of the opposition phalanx, but defeated them, killing 5,000 of them, while not losing any of their own number. By now, it was late in the day, when Eumenes learned the disastrous news that the baggage train had been captured. While Peucestes and the cavalry force were nearby and intact, choosing to watch on to see the outcome of the battle. Knowing his only real hope of retaking his baggage train was via victory in battle, he sent to Peucestes hoping to rouse him to action, with Peucestes and those with him having also lost possessions in the baggage capture. The message came to no avail for Eumenes, with Peucestes emphasising his newfound neutrality by moving his force further away from the scene and across a river. No doubt disappointed, but with nothing he could do about it for now, Eumenes had no choice but to fight on. With no effective opposition cavalry now operating against them, Antigonus instructed the half of his cavalry under Python to focus their attention on the silver shields, while he and his half searched for Eumenes to finish the battle. As good as they were, the 3,000 silver shields, if they really were all still alive and functioning, knew there would be no match for the 4,000 to 4,500 heavy cavalry. Forming into a defensive square, they retreated to the river where Peucestes was, turning on him and blaming his desertion for the defeat of the cavalry, when, with the silver shield's success, they could have had victory over Antigonus. With night now falling, Eumenes took counsel with what remained of his satraps. Eumenes believed that if all the cavalry had fought, both sides were about equal, while Antigonus's phalanx had now been shattered, leaving the result in the balance, and the possibility somewhat advantaged Eumenes. While the satraps believed Eumenes and his cause were no longer in their best interests, and that they should rapidly retreat to the safety of the upper satrapies. The Macedonian contingent of the rank and file were having nothing to do with either fighting on or retreating, with their focus on the loss of the wealth that they had gathered over many years of fighting, and their families, which were now under the control of Antigonus. Although the meeting of the satraps broke up with no firm plan, the Macedonian soldiers took matters into their own hand, and entered negotiations with Antigonus for the return of their goods and families. The negotiations must have been successful, as they seized Eumenes and exchanged him for their belongings, before enrolling in Antigonus's army. Taking their lead, the other generals and soldiers abandoned the scene, seeking only their own safety. Despite the mixed results on the battlefield, Antigonus's gamble to take the baggage train had paid off, and with the other satraps now scattered, it was up to him to arrange the settlement of the region, without the need to negotiate. The first matter to be settled was Antigonus, who was placed into a pit and burned alive, most likely for not turning the silver shields against Eumenes and over to Antigonus much earlier, an act that would have likely delivered victory to Antigonus at a much earlier stage and saved the lives of thousands of his men. He executed Eudamus and Calabanus, as they had brought elephants from India, greatly enhancing Eumenes' force, along with others who were hostile to him. Initially, he placed Eumenes under guard, while considering what to do with him. He could see the value of Eumenes as a good general and tactician, but he had little faith in Eumenes' promises, both because of his loyalty to Olympias and the kings, and Antigonus had already been betrayed once by Eumenes, after he had released him from the siege at Nora. To play it safe, Antigonus put Eumenes to death, although out of his personal respect for him, he had Eumenes cremated and returned the remains to his family. Antigonus spent the remainder of the winter in early 316 in a village near Ecbatana, and distributed his soldiers throughout the entire region. While Antigonus was wintering in Media, Python was busy furthering his own ends, going back to his plan from before Antigonus and Eumenes arrived and got in the way, seeking to expand his power and territory. However, Antigonus was not interested in having a powerful ally in the region, and tricked Python into attending his court, on the pretense of having good plans for him, instead accusing him before the council, followed by a swift execution. Similarly, Antigonus, when he realised the popularity of Peucestes in Persia, took his satrapy away from him. For a time he led Peucestes on, filling him with false hope of other roles for him, before finally exiling him from the region altogether. Antigonus was now in supreme control of Asia, and for now no one could challenge him, but would he be able to hold it? That's all for this one. Next time, all going well, we'll finish off the Second War of the Diadochi with events back in the Macedonian homelands. I'll see you then. Cheers.